In 1295, Dante Alighieri revolutionized poetry by singing La Vita Nuova in vernacular Italian. At a time when most works were in Latin or Greek, impenetrable to a mostly illiterate community, Dante engaged a broader public, allowing people to access the ideas he presented through his art in one's own language. In building a stronger commonplace, as Aristotle called it, a meeting of audience and artist meant to instill conviction in an idea, Dante not only became popular, he became a social reformer, and through his later work, The Divine Comedy has influenced the world. In 1918, James Joyce introduced readers to a new way to read a book, a revolution in song some considered Ulysses obscure, impenetrable at a time when artists were embracing a naturalistic style popularized by Émile Zola. But I think Joyce's obscurity plays a role in the literary program he made quite explicit. According to Richard Ellman, James Joyce confided to his French Ulysses translator, Jacques-Benoît Méquin, "I put in so many enigmas and puzzles that it will keep the professors busy for centuries arguing over what I meant, and that's the only way of ensuring one's immortality." What some see as obscurity then is only disguise, and only if you lack the key. Once you unlock the code to Joyce's enigmas, you can read more clearly what he meant, and I think Joyce gave us all the hints we need. Of course, we need to know something about Aristotle, St. Augustine, St. Thomas, and the likes of Giambattista Vico. Still, with the right key, we begin to see how all the novels form a single theme. I argue that Joyce was involved in a literary revolution comparable to Dante's, a revolution in verisimilitude to rival the Italians in vernacular. And if I'm right, that makes Leopold Bloom the Satan of Ulysses. To demonstrate that, we will consider the relationships between the works, beginning with Stephen Hero, where Stephen sets out to build an entire science of aesthetic. Stephen reappears in a portrait of the artist as a young man, where he vows he would create proudly out of the freedom and power of his soul as the great artificer whose name he bore. So Stephen's quest remains consistent between the two works. He wants to grow up and become an artist. At the end of Portrait, Stephen was preparing for flight, but as Ulysses begins, he's still earthbound and back in Dublin, but only one of two protagonists now, and not even the heroic one. Ulysses is the story of Bloomsday, a tribute to the day Joyce first walked with Nora. We name the day after Leopold Bloom, the older protagonist who joins with Stephen to battle Joyce's twinned antagonists, Church and State, to give them titles, the spiritual authority of a Roman Church and the material authority of a British language and economy. The antagonists are twinned because there are two of everything in Ulysses, two protagonists, two halves to every episode, characters that seem echoes of each other. Everything seems split or mirrored or doubled in Joyce's Dublin. Joyce gave us many hints to his meaning. Structurally, the book is a rough parallel to Homer's Odyssey, with some episodes out of order and one not belonging at all, The Wandering Rocks. That was an adventure for Jason, not Odysseus. It is also based on a rhythm inspired, according to Joyce, by the Italian rhetorician Giambattista Vico, whose view of history and the art that flows from its spirit is cyclical, moving through three eras: the theocratic or God-centered, the aristocratic or hero-centered, and the democratic, focusing on ordinary people, sort of like Zola's vision for naturalism. And then the cycle begins again. Joyce said to Patrick Collum, "I don't take Vico's speculations literally, I use his cycles as a trellis." Ulysses' episodes beat out this cadence, except we note that the final triplet is reversed. What should be Vico's next theocratic turn aligns with the democratic assemblage in the cabman's shelter. The aristocratic remains the imperious voice of Ithaca's dialectic in the middle, but not only does the cycle no longer end with the democratic, it ends with a female god. The novel ends with Molly's gaiocracy. There's another trellis Joyce uses, and this one is slightly bent too. Joyce followed Aquinas and others in basing his work on Aristotle's epitome of clear speech, the syllogism. The typical syllogism has three parts: a subject, a predicate, and a middle term that relates the two in what Aristotle calls the most satisfying relation. For instance, the humanity of Socrates, humanity's mortality, and the inevitable death of Socrates. We'll get to that dot in a moment. Joyce uses the syllogism to symbolize the healing of Dublin's doubling, a sundering in which a wasteland drought plagues Ireland. Metaphorically, the narrative searches for the most satisfying relation to bring rest and reconciliation to our wandering protagonists. At the end of this odyssey, though, only one protagonist rests. The other continues his wanderings, hopefully a little closer to becoming an artist. Don Gifford points out the clues, letters opening specific sections. S in stately for Stephen, the syllogism's subject. M in Mr. Leopold Bloom for Molly, the middle term, and P in preparatory for Poldy, Molly's nickname for Bloom and the syllogism's predicate, its active component. As Gifford notes, medieval pedagogy regarded the sequence SMP as the cognitive order of thought and therefore as the order in which they should be taught. But that clue conflicts with another one that Stuart Gilbert discloses in his scheme for Aeolus. Gilbert tells us that this episode's technique is enthymemic, a syllogism Aristotle considered ideal for persuasion, but a non-standard form. Gifford says, in logic, an enthymeme is a syllogism in which one of the premises is only implicit, or is based on probability instead of true for all cases. An enthymeme thus resembles a syllogism, but is more rhetorical than it is logical. Based on this book's structure, Joyce uses the enthymeme for his metaphorical syllogism. The middle term's suppression makes an enthymeme non-standard. It drops out or is assumed. Enthymemes are ideal commands or declarations, such as advertising slogans. For instance, when we hear "smart shoppers" by Kino's, we grasp the subject, smart shoppers. The predicate concerns one brand, Kino's trousers, but the middle term concerning our choice remains implicit. We naturally assume we are smart shoppers. Therefore, with this abbreviated statement, the advertising writer has appropriated our own pride in determining what truth has been demonstrated. Since we are smart shoppers, we should buy Kino's. But Joyce's syllogism ends before the book does, as demonstrated by the full stop at line 17.2332 of the Gabler text, where Joyce explicitly instructed printers to place a large period. In logic, this marks a proof's QED, quod erat demonstrandum, or thus it has been shown, a logician's way of saying the end. If Ulysses is indeed an attempt at persuasion, Joyce should have stopped at Ithaca, since an enthymeme drops the middle term. Might we argue that he includes the middle term in Penelope for the very same reason Aristotle included the enthymeme in his Ars Rhetorica, to educate wise readers about the dangers of persuasion? Ulysses does come to a most satisfying joining. Molly and Bloom's joining at the end heals the schism, as we see when Dublin's drought breaks with a loud lone crack, episode 14's thunderclap pealing both to Stephen's horror and to announce a new Purefoy. That joining sees the older protagonist join, albeit in a bizarre way, with his wife, forming that most satisfying union through which human beings create more of each other, Joyce's metaphor for artistic creation. But they sleep head to toe in an odd position which precludes procreation. And there's another clue that something remains broken in Joyce's Dublin. Doubling persists into Penelope. Consider its structure. This reversed Viconian triplet plows through 8 solid blocks of text with no other punctuation than any of the rest, but a purposeful line break between blocks. The 8 are split in half by a period in the middle and one at the end, breaking the episode into what I call the 2 periods of Molly. Within each period, she moves through 4 ages, wife, mother, lover, and girl, first regressing from tonight to her Gibraltar childhood, then aging again, back to tonight, 4 movements doubled. The 4s follow us into Finnegan's Wake, but in Ulysses, the doubling signals that there is still something off with Stephen's literary revolution.